Folks, this is Tom Opry, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
We talked about foreign landowners like Anders Poulsen, who value the land. That was a word that you used for me. So much that they invest. What's the difference with a Scottish or a UK landowner valuing the land in their own way so much that they invest?
Yes, I think it's fair to say that one person values more than another. It's more about the ability to invest. And it's like there is the sort of the phrase in terms of the landowning community that you can be land rich and cash poor. So it's more about the extent to which the person who owns the land is able to invest, inward investment. And in the sense of some of the new owners that we see buying land in Scotland, their ability to invest inwardly is eye-watering in terms of the amount of money that they can put into these communities.
Okay. Is the idea to do what's best for wildlife and habitat? What I'm trying to get at is why are these historical baggage or grievances getting in the way? It's what I see. You see all this, there's a lot of, we said earlier today, there's a lot of commonality between different parties here, but they don't get along. Why is that?
Yeah, so that's interesting. That with respect to yourself, there's a North American view of Scotland that wants to up the ante on where those differences come from, and I think you just have to respect that people are different. People will always be different, and they'll want to do different things. They'll want to buy property for a whole multitude of different reasons. And some of the differences that we see in Scotland just now is that people own land with different ideals, different aspirations. Some people can do inward investment. Some people need to try and maximise the ability of the land to make money for them, and so on. And it's in that space that the tension arises.
But really, you guys seem so close. Is it just differences of opinion? Or is it something else? Case in point, you have a need to decrease deer populations on a per square kilometer in the range in order to get the trees to be able to have the opportunity to grow back. Yet the gamekeepers want to shoot deer. You guys both kind of want the same thing in some ways. Why isn't there an opportunity to find that common ground? Or is there an opportunity?
So the difficulty there is that we don't have any natural predators, so nobody's disputing the fact that deer need to be managed. If you don't manage deer, then you do have a sort of a welfare issue where deer are just, they're dying by natural means in the hill, but in numbers and in terms of a way that, it doesn't need to happen. If you had predators, the predators would eat those animals. So there isn't an issue about, and the difference isn't in terms of whether we should manage the deer population. The difference is down to the density at which you have the deer on the ground. And that gets down to your objective. So if your objective is sport shooting, then you may wish to have higher numbers of deer. If your objective is to let nature have its freedom, and for lots of species to benefit rather than just a single species, then the chances are you'll want deer at a lower density. So the deer debate is simply about numbers, I think, and what is that optimum density. And that optimum density just comes down to what your objective is.
But isn't that a human, that's an opinion you have based on the knowledge set that you possess. How do you substantiate that? You say you want to let nature go free, yet you are impugning your thought on nature. If nature was going to go free, we just kind of let it go, wouldn't we? So what is this? How is nature being let free by calling excessive numbers of deer?
Yeah. Well, so it's a good question. It's one that everybody should ask and have a good answer to. So in terms of the ecosystems around the world, humans have had massive impact already. And it's the extent to which you want nature to be free from those impacts of humans, or whether you want to say, well, humans have had impact, so we'll continue to manage with respect to those impacts. And if you take it down to the deer debate, then it's, if you take Europe, what's the deer density in Europe, where they've got natural predators and where the deer live in fantastic habitats.
But let's talk about Scotland, because the deer there, it's a different habitat, it's a different environment.
But no, with respect, I don't think that's the case. I think that's Europe is a massive area, so yes, you could pick areas of Europe where you could say it's different. But if you go to Norway, for example, where they've got predators, you look at deer density, you look at the phenomenal habitats they've got there, look at the state of the deer, look at the sport shooting and the hunting interests. Their deer are managed at densities of about 4 deer per square kilometre. That's sort of common across Europe. What's incredibly unnatural is the deer densities in Scotland, and they're unnatural because of human interference, because people want them that way, and they've managed the population to be that way because they've removed the predators. So
well, it's interesting you say that, and I think I told you this last time we were here. I mean, I've driven up and I've put thousands of miles driving throughout the Highlands. And the one thing, back home when I drive around, even just down the road to the store, the corner store, I run into deer. I mean, I see deer. I see large ungulates everywhere. And our per square kilometer is based on, the habitat, what it can withhold, as far as being in a natural environment for the deer that offers them the things they need. Yet I don't see large numbers of deer. Now, I did go down the carriageway going into Dunkeld that you told me about last time, and got binoculars out, and I really looked over the land really hard. And yes, I found some deer, groups of 10, 15, maybe 80 or to 100 deer all across the hillside, glassing over the course of about 30 minutes. But back where I come from in the United States, to see that many elk in a similar environment, that's pretty normal. But what I'm not seeing is deer everywhere. Now, of course, if there's a forest, you're not going to see them and stuff. But I don't have the same experience with deer that I have back home as far as seeing them just traveling around here. I mean, if there's such a problem with deer everywhere, where is the problem? Is it just certain estates, or is it all estates, or is it all over the island?
No, I think that's the issue, though. So again, it's that you've got somebody, again with respect, that comes into the country and travels for, and as you say, 1,000 miles, but you don't live here or whatever, and you're sort of saying, well, there's no deer because I'm not seeing the deer. But then for the people who live here, it's like everybody knows where the deer are. Everybody knows where there's hot spots on the road, where there's lots of road traffic accidents. If you look at the number of insurance claims in terms of cars hitting deer, it's going through the roof. So I can't comment on the fact that you haven't seen deer, but that there are areas in Scotland where there are lots of deer. But then to say I can't remember the phrase you use, but it's like you've got to talk about everything in its context. So there'll be some areas where there are deer problems, and there's other areas where there's not. And it's like talking about Europe, talking about Scotland as just one single, one size fits all. It just doesn't work. We've got to nail it down to work out where exactly are we speaking about.
Yeah, 100%. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get at is where are these problems that you have there? I understand that there are some estates that have high deer numbers, and that's what they manage for. But even in my travels going to different estates, I mean, I've been in estates where 20,000 acres, and they tell me they have 250 to 300 deer, and they actively manage the deer to keep it at that population, between culling and sport shooting. So I'm just trying to get from you, is this problem wide across the breadth of the Highlands, or is it just in specific estates that it's a real, or geographic areas within Scotland?
Oh no, I think it's certainly in certain geographic areas, and we've seen in recent times, we've seen a big change, and lots of areas now are managing at lower deer density, whereas in the past they've had high deer density. So I think there's a sea change happening.
We talked about this a little bit earlier. Why is John Muir, your charity, buying estates? What is the purpose of buying the estates, and what is your ultimate end goal?
Yeah. So, are we buying lots of estates? I don't really think so. We own quite a bit of land. We don't need to own land. We can quite easily work in partnership with other people. The kind of the who owns the legal title to the land isn't really an aspiration of ours. What is to try and have areas across the length and the breadth of the UK where nature has most freedom, so that the primary thing that's happening in the land is the freedom of nature. And in a small island like ours, that is an increasingly fragile and rare asset. So what we'd like to be is to be the charity that stands up for wild places with 3 freedoms right at the core of it. So one is freedom for nature to do its stuff, one is freedom for people to enjoy, and the third one's freedom for communities to benefit. And you look at the size of the UK and you say, well, the UK is not one amorphous mass all the same. It's split into what you call different biogeographic zones. You've got some areas that are chalk grassland, you've got other areas that are, I don't know, Lucian gneiss or cairngorms or whatever. It's very varied, so you can keep slicing that cake up into ever smaller and smaller units, but roughly we've put the UK into 46 units. And in each one of those units, biogeographic zones, we would like to have something that showcases exemplary management of the UK's best wild places.
And that's meant to educate the broader public about, this is what we think is the right way to manage this particular land in one of those regions.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite what we think. It's just saying that in this area, nature's been given its freedom. So if you want to see what nature's freedom looks like in the UK, in one of these biogeographic zones, it's not managed for an economic gain, it's not managed for a particular sporting interest, it's not managed for a crop. It's just managed in a way that is giving nature as much freedom as it can have, given the social and geographic context.
Okay. So you had mentioned, Ben Nevis, that you didn't think humans could manage the land, that we're not capable of it. Explain that to me. Why can't humans manage land? And if you could paraphrase my question.
Yes.
Why can't humans manage the land?
Why humans can manage the land.
Well, you had made a comment that I don't think that we are in our genetic makeup, something along those lines. You said that, we can't, we're just not predisposed to manage the land. So I'm just trying to get where you come from.
So there's a difference between managing land and managing land sustainably. So are humans across the globe predisposed to manage our natural assets in a way that's sustainable? Sadly, I think there's too many examples of where we're not predisposed to manage it sustainably. We will exploit our assets to benefit the short-term gains. And as you and I were discussing recently, I've just been listening to a series on the fall of civilizations across the globe. And history shows us that, generally speaking, humans do exploit their resources to the point that it has a detrimental effect on themselves. And I think that's the thing that we've got to be very cautious about. We've got to try and find ways that, how do we recognise the selfish gene? How do we recognise this drive for economic growth all the time, but at the same time protect the very asset that keeps us all living in a functioning global system?
Yeah, great answer. Do you dislike the wealthy sporting estate landowners? And if you do, why? If you don't, why?
Yeah. So do I dislike wealthy sporting estate landowners? Of course I don't. I dislike very few people in the world. Do I agree with their objectives? It would depend on where the objectives came from. It's like, everybody's got different objectives. And, at many levels, most people are quite agreeable. There's very few people who set out with evil intent. So I don't have an issue with the people. I think it's that there's a space for everything. I think it's reasonable to expect the UK to have areas where nature's free, and that it's not a zoo, it's not a small nature reserve, it's just an example where we can take ourselves and we can take our children to say, look, this is what nature's about. You're not always going to see it. These are assets that are across the globe being lost really quickly. What we're trying to do is to find a way that as society we can manage them. We're not aspiring to make the whole of the UK like that. We would just like there to be some areas that we can all celebrate and say, yeah, That's great. Now, within the mosaic, you're going to have agricultural communities. You're going to have to produce crops. You're going to have people who want to manage the land in different ways. So there is something at the core of this, which is about respecting people's private property rights and saying, well, yeah, if you own the land and that's what you want to do, might not be what we want to do. We might even argue against it. But at the end of the day, you as the owner have to make choices as to what you do within the laws of the land.
Okay. You had mentioned in the past about that there's going to be a change on the economically as far as jobs in the Highlands. The move away from the sporting estates. It's kind of on the way out, being replaced by tourism jobs. Could you tell me what kind of jobs will these be? What will they pay? Will they keep schools full? Give me some idea. Where is this money going to come from? Because I asked the same question to Nigel, and he says that the model is untested. It doesn't exist as far as being something as reality on the ground. What kind of jobs are we going to replace these sporting estate jobs with, and what are they going to pay?
Well, so I think we need to go back, and in a sense, it's that the sporting estates. Your previous question was, are we against sporting estates? No, they can continue. If they've got a market, they can continue to run on whatever market model they've got. That's their choice. If you look at the land that we own as a John Muir Trust, or even those that are involved in the environmental sector, the employment base per acre is higher than it is on the sporting estates. So those are not jobs in the sort of tourism sector. Those are jobs in land management. These are high quality jobs. So I think there's a false narrative in there somewhere that somehow to manage the land with more regard for nature has less jobs. The evidence is that's not the case.
But what are these jobs and what do they pay? I mean, give me some idea, because just take a forestry block. You have a guy, when you plant the trees, there's labor that goes involved in planting, prepping and planting. And then 40, 50, 60 years from now, they harvest the trees. Yeah, there might be a forester that might cruise it once in a while and look at it, but what else is happening there?
So I think if you go for there's three key things. The land is, we've been speaking about deer management. So to control deer at lower densities takes more effort, possibly, than it does at high density. So just in a direct comparison, if you said, how many deer are shot or whatever, we still have to employ the people that shoot and cull the deer. We have to employ the people that maintain the footpaths. We have to employ the people that design and maintain the visitor interpretation for those that come there. We have to employ people who work with the communities and the schools to show them about, we've got a programme that's Hill to Grill, which is showing school children where their venison comes from. We've got programmes that are developing junior rangers in schools. So there's a raft of jobs. There's a raft of jobs associated with the land, but over and above that, I think that the argument is more than that. And it's something that we're doing at the moment that's quite exciting. But what COVID showed us and what broadband has shown us is that people want to live in these rural areas. But you can live in these rural areas, you can enjoy them. You can have a job in the city. You can have a big income. You can communicate with the rest of your sector, whatever that sector is. It doesn't really matter, through broadband connections now. And you can be living in some of the most spectacular places in the world. Your children can go to a local school. The concept that we need to, in some way, have extractive industries based on our land is kind of moved. That's a sort of an old paradigm. There's been a big shift now.
Well, I mean, tourism, and then what you're talking about is a change because of technology with fiber and the internet accessibility, so that people can work remotely. So it's really two different economic models, because if tourism is based on seasonality. I mean, do you see buses of people coming up on the Highlands, when they're covered in 2, 3, 4 feet of snow? I mean, there's a period, and I've seen it in different places, out in Isle of Muck.
But again, the problem is that we're going generic. So if you take Nevis, Nevis in terms of tourism, very popular, Cairngorm, skiing. There's areas in Scotland where there are honeypots of winter tourism. But yes, if you take the Northwest Highlands, yeah, that's not its tourism season. So, but is the visitor service industry, service sector, is that the employment model? No, it's not. There's lots of other employment models.
Yeah, it's we have the same thing in Montana. We were very lucky that 20, 30 years ago they wired the whole thing with fiber, and so all the telephone co-ops got paid by the federal government to do that. So now, of course, last year where I live was the fastest growing county in the entire United States because people were trying to leave the craziness of COVID restrictions on the coast, and they came to the countryside, the mountains, right? Is there going to be some unintended consequences with something like that too? Because you get people here. I've heard the whole story about incomers. You get people here, as you mentioned, that don't understand nature when they get out of their car, yet they come here and live in it. How are you going to deal with that?
And that's good. So whether you've got white settlers, blow-ins, whatever phrase you use, there are difficulties with that. And I think the biggest difficulty is to do with cultural change. And I've noticed it through my life living in Highland communities, is that, people come to live in these areas and then the culture changes. They don't have the same depth of background and so on. Some of those changes are for the better, to be honest. Some of them are more challenging, and I say that from a very personal perspective. So if I feel challenged at a personal level, that means that the chances are everybody feels challenged. But that's the reality of life, and I think we just have to address those challenges and work with the people. There's a lovely phrase in Gaelic, which is Tíornanog, which is sort of used in the context of Tíornanog crofters, so forever young. So people who come to the Highlands full of enthusiasm that they're going to make this great new life, and they're going to have a croft that's a viable, sustainable food-producing unit. And then they go through 2 or 3 winters in the Northwest Highlands, and the reality they find very different.
We're hoping the same thing in Montana.
Yeah. No, but you've got to allow people to adjust. So would I be against people of a different culture coming to the Highlands? No, not at all. Do we need to find a way to get on and adjust? Yes. Do we need to start the conversation with a polarised, antagonistic approach? No, we don't. There's a way to start those conversations and say, look, we will treat you with respect and dignity, but have the same regard back the way, and let's have the conversation. Let's challenge what our knowledge is and say, well, maybe there's other bits of information that we need to throw into the puzzle before we start making judgment.
Yeah, great answer. When we left each other the last time, you mentioned something about that you're not a rewilder. So answer that question to me. Why are you not a rewilder?
I think words are loaded, and the rewilding word is incredibly loaded with lots of connotations, whether justified or not. But one of the connotations might be that in some way the rewilding word is anti-people, anti-community, anti-something. And I just don't want to be associated with that. That's not... I think that we are more than capable of looking after our natural assets and having vibrant communities living in amongst those areas without this idea that we need to... that it's one or other. I think that's the problem. And the rewilding argument, I think when it started, I think it's changed. And I think, to be fair to those that use that phrase or stand under that banner, they're adjusting to a much more thing that is more broadly acceptable. So at the moment, it's a word that I find unhelpful in terms of the debate because it's polarised. But it's the principles are, depending on how you unpack the principles are reasonable, I think.
Okay. No, another good answer. You mentioned that in the parking lot when we left the other day, and I'm like, damn, I need to know what he's, I need to have this on camera. I think that's good. So, yeah, because like I said, we've interviewed Nigel. I'm actually going to be interviewing on Saturday, Pete Cairns from Scottish Big Picture, and obviously they're Trees for Life, and they consider themselves rewilders. So just trying to be able to give you guys some things. So scientists tell me that woodlands are declining naturally, this progression due to a more acidification of soils, causing moorland to be more dominant in the highlands. why break that iron layer and plant trees? I mean, the evidence points to less trees historically over the thousands of years here. Why do we want more trees up on the highlands, in these moorlands?
You know, for me, I think that's the crux of the question. I think it's your crux question. And I think it's based on an extraordinary misunderstanding. So the way the question's been framed is that do we want more trees? And it's not really that. It's that what we want is the trees are there just now. All we're saying is just let the trees grow. So if you reduce the grazing pressure, we don't need to plant trees. There's lots of examples in Scotland where with reduced grazing pressure, you've seen the trees come away. They are in the ground. There is a kind of this notion that the climate is such that trees don't want to grow in Scotland it's a construct that people are working quite hard to create. But the problem with the argument is that, well, what happens if the trees are there and they just want to grow? Nobody's planting them. You're just reducing the deer grazing pressure and the trees are starting to grow. What then? And is it not slightly unusual, I think I said this before, that Scotland is almost unique across Europe and it doesn't have a natural tree line? That's not to do with our climate or anything. That's just to do with the fact it's been overgrazed. And there's so many examples to evidence that it's not even a theoretical debate. It's just an evidence-led argument.
So, just curious. I've had a lot of these folks that are very on the rewilding side mention this Caledonian forest, and I think you've even talked about that. Do you really believe that there was this Caledonian forest, and is that somewhere that you guys hope to see achieved on the highlands? Yeah, no. So that's the reword, going back to something, and my sort of view is that if you look at some of the deep peat in Scotland and you look at the transects through it, you'll see layers of trees at different times. Can we package 10,000 years of Scotland's history and trees into a soundbite? No, we can't. There's been trees have come and gone, there's been fires, there's been a whole host of things. Was there more trees in our environment than there are today? Probably yes. I mean, almost without doubt. Was there this sort of great wood of Caledon at some point in time? Maybe. But that's not the argument. The argument for me is that can we have some areas where if there are trees and they want to grow, that we let them grow and we don't overgraze them. Okay, good answer. Along the same lines, if you have more trees by having less deer, aren't you forcing nature to go where you want it to go? I mean, you're not really letting it be wild, or are you letting it be wild? Because you've mentioned that a couple of times. You want things to be wild so that people can see these areas, but aren't you forcing nature to go in a certain direction? Yeah, so forcing nature to go in a certain direction, interesting challenge. And then you're right. At the core of what we're doing is to manage deer to a certain density that is one that we decide on. So therefore, immediately you've got a human choice has come into it. We reference that by saying, though, these are the sorts of densities that red deer occur at across the northern hemisphere. So it does feel natural, and what feels, if you look at data from elsewhere, what feels unnatural is our deer density. So we're trying to play the role of the apex predator, but we're also trying to redress a long-term problem. And red deer, I think, largely accepted is a woodland animal, but in Scotland, it's not in a woodland. It's out on the open range. We've got relatively high winter mortality just through lack of shelter and feed in the wintertime, which, at one level is like, well, you're always going to get natural mortality, but if it's because of lack of food and lack of shelter, it just seems a wee bit unnatural. And having the smallest red deer in the world because they've got no food and no shelter doesn't seem something that we want to acclaim or be proud of. And actually just playing the role of the apex predator to allow the habitat to be a little bit richer and for the deer to be healthier seems like quite a reasonable intervention. It's interesting you say that. In talking with these scientists that deal with deer and whatnot, I think we can all agree the historical record over the last 2,000 years, there probably hasn't been more than about 5% woodland cover in Scotland. It's a little more than that now, but not much more, I guess. These deer have survived fine for the last couple thousand years, and I've been told by gamekeepers that the real issue for them is, especially on the West Coast, is cold rain. The rain, the weather. That's really what that causes the issues of mortality. Shouldn't we have these? Shouldn't we have these natural moorland habitats, these open habitats that have been there for thousands of years? That according to the scientists, that's the natural progression of the soils, and they should be there. And I've been to some places where there's trees planted all up from one end to the other. And in these moorland areas we have are I think there's 60% of the world's moorland is here in the UK, and the UN acknowledges that it's an important environmental habitat. Shouldn't we have open moorlands in Scotland?
I don't think anybody's saying we shouldn't.
Okay. I'm seeing trees that are planted all over on moorland, on heather. All up and down in Cairngorms and everywhere else, and I'm seeing these schemes where they're planting trees, whether it's some sort of rewilding effort or a timber scheme or whatever it is that, shouldn't we still, the question is, do you value open moorland?
So I think there's a sort of again, it's just these conversations is that, so that in terms of if the Highlands was to reduce its deer grazing pressure and the trees were to grow, you're not going to get wall-to-wall trees. You will have large open areas where there will be moorland. So I guess the people who are worried about it sort of feel that in some way they want to claim that the aspiration is wall-to-wall trees. No, it's not. But then on the other side, you could say, do I think it's like you want the whole of the east coast of Scotland to be managed moorland with patches of burning all over it, so that it's kind of this patchwork mosaic, simply for the right to shoot one species of bird? It doesn't. No, that wouldn't be my land use objective. I totally accept that some people buy land and that shooting red grouse is seen as a sport they want to indulge in, but everybody's got a view. That wouldn't be the way I would manage the land, no.
Okay. Back a little bit on history. Were the Highlands, did humans deforest Scotland historically? Or because I think what the scientists are telling me that, 4,000 years ago to 9,000 years ago, there was a lot of tree cover. A large percentage of the island was covered in trees. But do you really feel personally that humans are the main reason why there's such less tree cover?
Humans have had a massive impact. One of the things that I came across recently, which was fascinated by, was all the iron smelters that are just being uncovered. And you think, in terms of the efficiency of getting iron out of rocks all those years ago, the amount of fuel that was required for that. And then if you look at the smelters were all beside waterways to allow obviously the fuel to be taken down. And to think that didn't have an impact on our forests would be quite naive. So you've got that. Then you've got, in terms of, for grazing, you'll know this from the North American model, is that, when the settlers came from Europe, first thing they did was to clear the woodlands to create pasture. So yes, historically, people will remove trees from...
But historically, there really wasn't very many people here either. I've had some scientists tell me that, a lot of these glens really didn't see hardly anything. And most of these were pastoralists that had a handful of livestock. So there wasn't a major grazing pressure on anything. And there wasn't a lot of people. And the idea of, the smelting, I've looked into that. And yeah, it's, obviously they're cutting every piece of oak you can so that you can go ahead and smelt. But one of the scientists told me, is like, well, yeah, you're never going to take all the trees out, and they're all going to come back eventually if if that seed base is there.
Yeah, they will. They'll come back if there's no grazing. But none of this is complex. If you've got grazing pressure on top of tree seedlings, then the trees won't grow. So your herbivores can't graze adult trees, but they can young seedlings, and they will. So getting them re-established in the face of grazing pressure isn't as easy as you might think. The other thing we'll be careful about is that it's like saying, you're using the phrase that scientists say as if it's a singular. Is the science community is very diverse and it's got lots of diverse views. it's like speaking to lawyers. You're always going to get a different opinion. So
It's like assholes, right? Everybody has one. One of the things Nigel Fraser told me, the chairman of Trees for Life, he says that everything existed before humans in a better way than now. How do you respond to that?
it's context is everything. It's like, everything. What yeah.
Chairman of Trees for Life.
So say it again. Everything.
Everything existed better than it does now. So the idea is before humans started messing with things, terraforming the earth, whatever,
So before the evolution of humans, do you mean?
Before we had humans on this island.
But humans, when the ice retreated, humans came with the retreating ice. So it's I'd need Nigel here to discuss that. It's you can't.
My point is, we've been here from the beginning. I mean, we're part of this whole thing.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So last time we talked a lot. We talked a lot about hunting, trying to make. There was a couple of key things you talked to me about as far as trying to make hunting accessible to the broader public here in Scotland, and also about trying to educate women and getting them interested in so that they could partake in it. So I want to cover a few things on that.
People.
What's that?
Well, educate people.
Educate people. That was, creative.
Of all genders. It's not specific.
Yeah, but you specifically talked about a program that you had a woman stalker.
Because in the past it's like.
Yeah, I mean, historically, men have been hunters, right? So
exactly.
that's. I'm not trying to nitpick it or anything. So this is a policy to encourage hunting, free, including the women. You've been the CEO for how long? At
3 years, I think.
3 years now? Okay. Is this a policy that you guys have now published? Is this something that the public is aware of?
So slowly. So there's just big statements. So in terms of each of our properties, are people locally aware that we're encouraging people from the communities to get access to shoot deer in our land? Then slowly I'd like to think that message is being filtered out. It's not free for all. We have to manage it. People have to be checked to make sure they've got, at one level there's qualifications, but it's more than that. It's just that there's comfort that they've got the right skill sets to look after themselves, to do the job humanely, and to get themselves and the venison they're taking off the hill safely. So we're sort of moving into that space.
Is the policy published, or how do people find out about it?
So just in terms of locally, through our networks in each of the communities that we own. So it's not in the sense of do we have a public policy? It's that the way that we relate to our communities that we work in isn't through policies. It's through speaking to people.
Okay. Will you be working with any of the shooting organizations here in this country to help promote that?
We could do. There's no reason why not.
Could you paraphrase that though? Or will you? We might consider working with.
I think our priority. So our priority is to give people who live and work in those communities access to the resource. If they're members of any of the number of shooting organisations, that's up to them. But what we're not doing is managing the land to provide an asset for any of those sporting bodies, as it were. That's not what it's about. We're about freedom for communities to benefit. So our emphasis is on the local people that live there, not the sporting bodies that have a national UK interest.
So basically, this program wouldn't be set up so that if a local stalker wanted to come and bring someone over on one of your estates, this is more just for people in the local communities to have an opportunity to have access to hunt through a system with you guys.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You'd suggested that driven grouse shooting and even the traditional form of stalking is lacking in respect for the quarry. How does it compare to the mass culling and shooting deer at night, regardless of age? We're talking about respecting the animal.
I think there's a sense in which that question attributes stuff to me that I'm just not comfortable with. So you need to unpack the question just a bit. So give me the question.
Yeah.
bits.
So in the past, you'd spoken about, again, raising, managing the land so that folks can have a driven grouse shoot, all for their enjoyment.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about traditional stalking and lacking in respect for the quarry, for the animal. How does that compare to mass culling and shooting deer at night, regardless of the age class of the animals? I'm just trying to compare the apples to apples,
Yeah, but so you need to separate out, right? Any comments I make about grouse shooting, it's a sort of you're managing just for one quarry species large areas of land to the detriment of lots of other things. I'm not sure that I find traditional sports shooting of deer, in terms of the actual practice of it, disrespectful of deer. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think it's very, very respectful of the deer. I think in terms of the deer densities that sometimes the deer are managed at a population level, that isn't great for the deer. And I think that having habitat where deer don't have access to food and shelter is disrespectful to the animal. But that's the management of the population versus the practice of sport shooting. And I think those are really important differences. I think that if you get muddled in there, then you create lots of offence. It's just unnecessary. And then there was a follow-up. There was another part to that question, which was, the mass shooting of animals at night through all ages or something.
Different age class animals. I mean, you're just trying to shoot every animal you can in order to remove the or drop the population down.
Yeah. So, but again, it's emotive language, isn't it? So the mass shooting of animals, it's like
the shooting of large numbers of animals,
which is culling. So you're carrying out a reduction cull. Whether you carry out a reduction cull in the daytime or at night time, it's the same thing. It's a reduction cull. You are shooting through the ages and you're doing it humanely. Is there an argument to say that shooting deer at night is any less humane? No, there's not. It's every bit as humane. In fact, in lots of ways, it's more humane. Can it go wrong? Yes, it can. Should it be done under authorization? Yeah, probably. But I don't think that. I'm not aware of anything that says that a reduction cull carried out under spotlight has got any more welfare issues to a reduction cull carried out in daylight.
But I'm comparing grouse shooting, which you said you felt was disrespectful to the quarry.
Well, not so much. No, it's the land. It's all about. So, if I think the idea of shooting quarry species with a pellet gun, where you can't guarantee an instant kill. What you're doing is wounding the animal so it comes out of the air, it can be picked up by a dog or whatever and taken back, is very different to a marksman shooting deer. I think that so if it is acceptable to sport shooters to do that way of shooting, then you sort of say, well, okay, so maybe it's the only way you can shoot these birds, but then you're managing them to shoot them that way. That does strike me as slightly.
So the issue you have, it's the method of take. A bullet from a high-powered rifle you feel is more effective at killing more quickly and more humanely than shooting them with a shotgun where they're going to die. They almost always die, from what I've seen, very quickly. And then whatever doesn't die immediately is still picked up by the dogs and stuff.
If you're concerned by welfare arguments, then there's not a debate there.
Yeah,
shooting with a marksman.
Well, you just mentioned that before, about respect towards the quarry, and so I'm just trying to get some.
I think it's less about. That's not the crux of the argument. Is about the land management, the management of the land, where you're managing for just one species, is farming on an intensive scale. So it's like, yes, we grow barley. In fields, we grow grouse on our grouse moors, but it's like, don't pretend it's anything else. It's like you're managing for a single species. Nature's not about one species dominating, it's about providing a space for a whole variety of things.
You mentioned that the managing for grouse moors is detrimental to other things. What is it detrimental to? What is the management of grouse moors detrimental to?
Oh, probably woodland animals.
But how would that? Explain that. What you mentioned that it's detrimental to other animals. So what other animals, and why is it detrimental?
Well, so you get some animals live in a desert. You get some animals live in a sea. You get some animals live in a moorland. You get some animals live in a woodland. if you've only got a moorland, then you're not going to have the animals that are more traditionally associated with the woodland.
But it's a moorland. It's a totally different environment. I mean, it's like if you live in the ocean, you don't go to the desert, do you?
No, but you've created it. We're not talking about natural biotopes. We're talking about ones that are man-made.
But the UN says that 60 to 70% of the world's natural moorlands exist in the UK.
Ah,
I mean, so you're telling me that managing it was detrimental for grouse. If you manage for grouse, it's detrimental to other animals. I'm asking you, how is it detrimental into what animal?
yeah, but that's like saying that the X% of the prairies in the world, where are they? Or the wheatlands in the world, where are they? So you're taking a feature, a man-made feature, and you're saying, where do you find that man-made feature in the world? So you find it in terms of open moorland managed in that way. It's quite a rare habitat. It's been managed by people to create that, and that's where you find it, yes, but it's man-made.
But do you say it's man-made, or do you say man has influenced it? Because I don't think man created the moor. I mean, he didn't create the heather. He didn't create all the different things that live in there. It didn't create the rain that comes through there.
He creates the absence of trees on it by either removing the trees. There's lots of evidence of trees actually being removed, and by regular burning of that habitat that prevents the trees growing, and by maintaining high densities of grazing animals on it for whether it's tick removal or whatever. So
I mean, you'd said in the early statement just now that that the moorland management for grouse was detrimental. So I'm just
well, it's detrimental.
How is it detrimental, and to what species? So that's all I was trying for clarification.
Yeah, so it's not detrimental to grouse. It's very good for grouse.
Mm-hmm. It's not detrimental to avian raptors. It's not detrimental to the hares that are there.
It's not. Well, I think there's stuff in the news today that's showing quite clearly it is detrimental to avian raptors.
Is it? How's that?
Well, there's a news article showing that somebody's just been shooting a goshawk. So in terms of predator control, so that the whole basis of maintaining a primary species for quarry is that you will want to reduce any animal that predates on it. Now, in this country, there are certain laws that says that you can shoot some of those animals, but not all of them. But the problem is that we've got and it's not everybody by any means, but there'll always be people who will go and shoot, whether deliberately or otherwise. That's for the law courts to decide. But all I'm saying is that in the news this week, people have been shooting birds that are illegal to shoot.
Is it fair to paint a brush over the 300 to 400 grouse moors in this country with, as you said, a very small number? I mean, I've talked to the folks that are in the know, and we're talking about a handful of keepers on one hand. It's always going to be a few bad apples in the bushel.
Yeah, and that argument's well rehearsed by those that want to defend that industry. So you sort of say, well, let's not even debate that. Let's just recognise that in terms of managing large areas of Scotland for one species, that's a choice. But it's not a choice that I would make, because it is just managing for one species, simply for the benefit of shooting that one species, which, to be honest, that's not even hunting. That's not even respectful to the method of hunting. And it's the same with pheasant rearing and so on. The idea that you farm animals, basically overgrown hens, and let them go so somebody can shoot them. It's like the world's going mad.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably look at the North American model and you could say the same thing, because we spend all our money on excise taxes and license fees and all that stuff, making sure that we have healthy habitats that ensure that we have healthy numbers of animals gives us an opportunity to have access to those animals. It's the same thing.
Well, no, it's not. No, it's not. If you manage the habitat, and as a result of healthy habitat, you have a surplus of species in a variety of different species, that's very different to managing for a single species, growing in captivity those animals that weren't even bred, couldn't even survive there naturally, and then releasing them simply so they can be shot is a very different model.
Okay. Well, we're talking about pheasant here, and there's really not much of a pheasant hunting industry in Scotland that I'm aware of. So
no pheasant there is. Huge hunting of pheasants.
Up here in the Highlands?
Yes.
Up in the moorlands, they're
releasing pheasants? If you've got Glenafric, they're releasing partridges and pheasants.
Down here in the valleys?
Well, depends what part, but yes, there's large areas in Scotland where their pheasants are a big thing, releasing pheasants, mass releasing of pheasants.
Okay. We had talked the other day about nesting shorebirds, and you made the statement that curlews, their survival is not contingent upon grouse boar management. That's what you'd said to me.
Yeah.
And so my question is, Curlew are virtually gone in England. This is science. The science have looked into this. Other than on managed grouse moors, populations have halved in the past 25 years, according to the British Trust for Ornithology. Dr. Dan Hoffman, a German researcher, found that the number of golden plover on the grouse moor Glen Ogle was 2 times larger than the whole population of plovers in Germany. A game and wildlife conservation study showed that there's a 3 times population increase in brood success of waders when the area was managed. You suggest walk-up hunting should replace driven hunting. I don't think there's an allure to the driven hunting because of tradition and the bag limits. Whether people will spend lots of money to come from abroad to shoot 6 or 8 brace of birds in a day after walking around in the moor. What's really wrong with shooting surplus grouse? Because it obviously has a positive impact on other creatures that live in that habitat.
I think fundamentally, I think that in terms of, for most of the people that shoot the grouse, very few of them are eating them. All these grouse are just getting buried in the ground. So that the issue, we're all being incredibly naive if there's a story here that says that the people that shoot grouse are doing it because they want to hunt to put food on the table. They're doing it for the privilege of shooting the bird. It's seen as one of the most exciting sport shooting birds to shoot because it flies fast and low. So it challenges the ability of the human to be able to shoot it. So much so that they've got somebody there loading the guns for them and they fire away. And a lot of the grouse never even get found after they've been shot. So that for me isn't the future of land management. That is simply gratuitous shooting and killing of things just for the sake of doing it, so that the person with the firearm can feel good about themselves. I don't subscribe to that in any shape or form at all.
Have you ever been on a grouse shoot?
Yes.
And
not pulling the trigger, but I have as a young laddie in the Highlands done grouse beating like most people have.
And I've been on several, and I've talked to lots of keepers. You made the comment that the grouse are buried. What I've seen is completely opposite. I mean, they are all sorted by age.
Yeah.
And then the game dealers come in and purchase them. And, we've been down to Tom Kitchen's restaurant in Edinburgh where, on the glorious 12th, he served grouse. And it was a big deal.
Yeah.
I can't see someone burying those things. Now, I'm not talking about high volume pheasant shooting down in the south. I'm talking about the grouse shooting here. I don't quite understand how you can say they're being buried and they're wasting the animals.
Okay. So you think in your narrative that every grouse that's shot in a grouse moor ends up in a restaurant?
No, I'm saying is that I've watched, they've given braces of birds to the shooters. Other birds have ended up going to the... Okay,
so phrase it a different way. So every grouse shot ends up on a dinner plate somewhere. That's what your narrative is?
What I'm saying is that the grouse that are retrieved, I've seen them go through a process where they are gone off to people's homes or they've gone off to a game dealer.
So have I.
And I've been told that is the process.
So have I. So nobody's denying whether that process happens. It does. What we're talking about is that if you look at the total energy expended into that and the proportion of birds that end up, how many birds are actually edible at the end of it in terms of full of lead pellets? To have that sort of discussion, you need to discuss it with all the facts, not just with an example of good practice. There is good practice. There's lots of bad practice.
So you're saying that there are other estates out there that are not following that practice?
Well, I'm not saying estates. No, I'm just saying that in terms of the process of a day, there'll be lots of birds that are so badly shot that they couldn't possibly go on a plate for human consumption. People don't like eating lead. So it's kind of, there are a few birds, always well publicised, that end up in some restaurant and so on. And then you think, well, if the bird doesn't have many pellets in it, did one pellet just manage to, miraculously hit its head and it was killed instantly, or was it left flapping around on the ground for ages because of a broken wing? It just doesn't compute for me.
Okay. No, I'm just trying to get so the last bit of stuff I have here, and I want you to address Kunyag. Okay, and that was something that, when we were here last time, was in the headlines with the situation that was going on there. Why are you culling deer on the estate?
So we're culling deer on all
on
our
the
property.
estate, Kunyag.
We're culling
Specifically,
deer. Yeah, but we're culling deer on all our
you're
properties.
culling it. You have a special permit for out of season. You have a special permit from Nature Scott to hunt at night, to lamp deer. I assume that's what it is, or can you hunt with thermals up there? I don't know. So
But you can't.
okay.
You can't
So why are you culling deer on the Kunyag estate?
effectively to reduce the balance, to reduce the density, to allow the trees that are there to grow. Simple as that.
Okay. Yeah, I was the Ascent Crofters Trust invited us up, and so we were able to go around and take a look at what's going on. Is it Ardvar? That's
Ardvar
the estate. Yeah,
estate.
the estate. That's
Ardvar's not Ascent Crofters Trust, but it's a different estate.
Yeah, it's a different estate. So we were able to go over there and see what was going on with the trees and what they have going on, because that's some of the last, I guess, holdings of oak forest in Scotland. And where are the trees going to grow on Kunyag? I mean, where do you guys, in your overall management scheme of that estate, now you have this couple of big mountains kind of in the middle of all of it, big ridge type mountains. Where are the trees? Are you guys planting trees there? Are there trees? I mean, other than the ones that I saw down by the Ardvar estate, there didn't seem to be any other trees on the estate. So what is the tree planting scheme for that estate?
Yeah, there's no tree planting scheme for that estate. The trees are there.
So where are the trees?
We could go for a walk and I could show you them.
Well, I saw some trees.
They're all along the south face. So if you go for a walk on the south face,
okay,
you will see trees everywhere. You can't see them from the roadside, obviously, because they're eaten by deer. There's a moribund holly woodland there that's kind of, on its last legs because there's so much grazing pressure.
How many deer are on that estate?
At the moment,
well, prior to you culling them, how many deer were there, and then how many deer did you guys cull?
Oh gosh, I don't have the figures. We finished the cull, but 100 and less than 150.
Now, or
no, how
prior
many deer
to?
did we cull? Sorry, it's about 150 mark.
How big is the estate?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Approximately.
Yeah. No.
10,000 acres to 5,000
No,
acres?
it's not.
It's a big place.
It is big,
It's beautiful.
It's big.
Yeah.
It is big, it is beautiful. But again, it's like, well, I'm not sure what so the deer density in there has been really high. We're reducing the deer density to allow the trees to grow. It's like, what's your question?
I was trying to find out how many deer are there, that's all. How many prior to the culling and how many are there now?
So we're aiming to get down to a density of about sort of 2 to 4 deer per square kilometre across the estate.
But what is the total number of deer, though?
Just now.
Before, now? I mean, you guys shot, how many deer you shot? I mean, don't you have to report that to the government?
Yeah, no, I do. So,
So how many deer did you guys shoot?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's about 100. So we manage lots of estates. I don't carry the exact numbers round in my head. I could get them for you in a second. Less than 150. Okay. But I mean, the numbers, it's to debate the numbers is to miss the point entirely. It's about getting the habitat and getting the trees to grow. So whatever numbers of deer need to be culled to get the trees to grow, that's what we'll do.
Okay. What I'm trying to get at, David, is that I'm trying to get some sort of understanding about what the total number of deer are that motivated you. We can talk about per square, but kilometer. But what I'm talking about is the number of deer that were there that you had to harvest. Because what I want to ask you, then I was going to lead into a question from the Ascent Crofters Trust. And so can you give me some idea of? I mean, you said that less than 150 were taken. Did you take all the deer off of the estate, or 50%, 20%, 10%? I'm just trying to get some sort of idea of what really was there, what propagated you guys to get these permits. What was the motivation? I know it's to get deer densities down. I understand that. But there had to be something that triggers, like, hey, we're seeing X amount of deer here. We need to remove. And how do you determine how many deer you need to remove there at Kunag?
So you get the authorizations for shooting deer out of season come on the back of an argument that says, is it necessary to prevent damage? Damage to what? Damage to trees that are growing. If you control deer in the seasons, then that's fine. You can prevent the damage in season. But then the new growth will simply get browsed off in the wintertime unless you continue to shoot the deer. So that's the logic for getting an out-of-season shooting. It means that you're unable to protect your habitats because there are deer on the ground in the out-of-season period. We're not a sporting estate. We don't require high densities of deer. If you take the north side of Kunag, and again, it's like everything, you need to understand the geography. But you take the north side, we had a herd there of about, 80 stags, just permanently resident in an area that was coming down into the birch woodland. The birch woodland's a Natura site, so lots of damage to woodland in that area. And in order to prevent that...
and that would be the area that's adjacent to Ardvor, correct? Because they're kind of on the northwest corner of...
Yeah, but I mean, that level of analysis is just so crude. But yes, if you want to discuss Kunag as in the northwest corner, yes. But the trees I'm speaking about are on the north. They're slightly further round.
Yeah. No, I mean, we've flown the whole thing. We've looked at it. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the landscape there. So this Asset Trafters Trust regards the deer as an asset, utilizing them for food. There's a couple of jobs for stalkers they get. They also look at it for promoting tourism, because the tourism that come there, the people like to see the deer. Plus it provides for lodging and meals. Why don't you work with them in that deer group?
So we've been working with them in that deer group for years.
But you guys left the deer group this last year or this year.
Yeah, because the collaborative approach wasn't working and the deer numbers were actually going up. The group had agreed to reduce the numbers, and that was the target, but the numbers weren't going down. The numbers were going the other way.
Well, they tell me the agreement was 7 deer per square kilometer. How far is that from where you want to be? That seems like a fairly low number at 7.
Yeah, but again, it's for people that don't understand deer. I think you start quoting these figures of 7 deer. It's not about deer per square kilometre. You've seen Kunag. So if you take in the top of those mountains, deer can't eat stone. So you have to exclude all that area as part of your per square kilometre figure. And then what you realise is actually the deer density is probably much higher. And then you quoting figures back and forth. It's like, look at the ground. Any crofter, any farmer who manages their grass fields or whatever, they don't talk about the numbers of sheep in the field or the number of sheep per square kilometre. They just look at the ground, look at the grass. And that's what we're doing with the habitat. We're looking at it and we're seeing it's overgrazed.
Okay. Obviously, there's some angst between...
Just hold up. Sure. That's the boys back.
Yeah, that's fine. I only got a couple more questions and we'll be done.
Okay, I'll just call them and then just ask them to hold for 2 minutes.
No, actually, they can keep coming. There won't be a problem. I won't probably hear it on their mic. So, obviously there's some angst there, and there's been some conversations. It's been in the media. I've read some articles where obviously the Asset Crofters Trust was the very first community trust that the government organized here in this country. And some of them are, because of this angst, have talked about enacting some law from 2003 that if they feel that a adjacent landowner is adversely affecting their livelihood because of this community trust, they can go in and purchase that land. It's a takeover. It's not mutual, I would assume. How do you respond to that effort to potentially purchase Kunag from JMT through this law.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if for all the land, remember that at the core of what the trust stands for is to bring about community benefit. And we hold that really dear. So when we talk about communities, we sort of say, well, is that what the community wants? What is the community? How big is the community? And in the context of the Aston Crofters Trust, the Aston Crofters Trust is a kind of a peculiar model. It was, as you say, one of the first ones, but it's not exactly a community ownership model. It's a group of crofters who own the landlord's interest in their land. And for them to exercise, or for that bit of legislation to be exercised, it would have to be the community. And ideally, if the community were able to manage in perpetuity that area of land for its natural assets, that would be a phenomenal outcome to aim for.
Well, they're heavy. I mean, I'm reading it in the paper. They're talking about enacting this clause in the law. How do you respond to that?
Well,
if they do it, how are you going to respond?
Well, so it's fine. So the first thing we would sort of say is, well, let's speak to the community and let's see what their land use objectives are. But remember, there's a group of people also on that ground. So it's what it boils down to is that you've got one group of private interests, the landlord's interest in a crofting estate, wanting at the moment to buy the asset of another private individual. So there's two property rights that are at stake there, and neither of those property rights represents a geographic community. So in terms of the bit of legislation that is being referred to, it can work if there's a genuine community thing there. It shows it's detrimental. But I think it can only work if the owners wanted to sell. It's not. You can't sort of force the sale with it.
Okay. The deer that you did harvest, did you guys leave the carcasses on the hill, or were they sold?
Majority of them were taken off the hill, put in the game dealers.
Okay. Some were left up.
Yeah, some were left. Yeah.
And why were they left up on the hill?
I guess, for lots of reasons. But I mean, actually leaving carcasses on the hill is quite a good thing to do. So in terms of ungulates in any ecosystem across the world, deer die. So rather than them being left as a result of death by starvation or malnutrition, or just inability to access shelter, these ones are humanely shot and then left, and the other animals can then benefit from the carcasses.
Yeah, eagles and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. That was my last question. So,
Good.
Yeah, no, that whole thing was crazy. So,
What?
The Ascent Crofters thing and all that, it just seems like there's a lot of angst there.
There is. It's not just Ascent Crofters though. I think that the sporting estates round about are anxious.
Yeah, no, Vesties. Yeah, I met Craig Ross, talked to him.
Yeah, no, and we've got to work that situation with them to say, look, our intent is to kill more deer, and we will, but we're trying to work with them to find a solution to the deer that are crossing the road. I'm sure Craig mentioned that.
Yeah, he said we're going to kill every fucking deer we can. That's what he told me.
Yeah, which is the language of drama, as it were.
Yeah, well, that's what he said. So like I said, he was also pissed at me because I parked on the side of the road to go film some of those deer that were out there feeding. And so he was like, look. And of course, once he figured out who I was, he was like, okay, don't worry about it. It's cool.
Yeah.
I kind of figured I was somebody from down south that was just doodling around on the land. Right?
Yeah, but then...
No, I think you helped me understand a lot of this. I really appreciate it. I think this helps out a lot as far as getting the meat of what you're trying to do. Like I said, I'm not looking for gotchas here. I just want to say, okay, at the end of the day,
it's context
I want us to leave this better than we can found it.
But I think that the key to all of it is, I'll be really interested to see how you stitch it together, but it's context, because you can set anything out of its context and create a misrepresentation that's just so unhelpful. But if it sits in its context, it's fine.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, like I said earlier, you guys all have a lot of the same things in common as far as, I mean, there are commonalities amongst all the groups here. It just seems there's got to be a way for people to figure out ways to work together.
Oh, definitely. It's not.
That's the one thing I look at, and it's, I got lots of friends on both sides of the aisle on lots of different things.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if we're doing it for the right reason, and we have to understand we're not always right, and
yeah, no, I totally get it.
Thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.